Hey, it's Mike from Brew-Dudes.com. So this week John is on vacation and I've chosen to replace him with a beautiful kegging system. So we've gotten some relatively new questions on the channel about kegging, and more importantly, how do you carbonate multiple kegs at one time? So I figured, let me show you how I do it. I'll walk you through some basics and a couple options and talk about some of the pitfalls. So let's just do a quick real refresher if you're just getting into kegging. You've decided that you've bottled your last beer, you don't want to do bottling anymore, so you want to get into kegging. Well, you gotta have a keg, and I'm just using a simple 3-gallon keg here for the sake of the camera, but you can get 5-gallon kegs, that's the norm. It starts with having a keg of your finished beer. You want it to be nice and cold when you're ready to start carbonating. You have to have a CO2 tank, pretty standard. This is a 5-pound CO2 tank. You need to have a regulator. You need some tubing. You need to have your gas disconnect, and that goes onto the keg. And then once you have that set up, you set your pressure to between 10 and 15 psi, depending on the temperature of your beer, and the beer will start carbonating. And the easiest way to do it is to just let it sit for a week, maybe even 2 weeks, and the beer will equilibrate to the amount of CO2 that you're adding pressure to, and it will carbonate. So we can go over the specifics of carbonation later, but so that's the simple way to keg one beer at a time. One regulator, one tube to one fitting, and you're off to the races. This is the way John's setup is. He does one keg at a time. He doesn't have a demand for a bunch of kegs. I have other setups to do multiple kegs at once. So let me switch this out and show you how to get to 2 kegs. Okay. In order to do 2 kegs at once, it's just simply the same process, but you need to somehow get yourself to having 2 fittings. And so what I have here is, again, my keg. This is a different regulator because I've got multiple regulators. This just came out of one of my beer fridges. And so keg, regulator, tubing, and then what you can see down here, and I'll get a better picture of it, is I have a T fitting to split the gas line into 2, and it's just that simple. So now I can hook up 2 beers, 2 kegs off of the one tank. As long as I want them at the same PSI, that'll work just fine. T-fitting can be a little bit gangly because it's a 90-degree bend. They do sell Y fittings. When I set this one up in order to do my Belgian double with the Brett and no Brett, that's what this was being used for. I couldn't find my Y, so I'm using a T. But this works just as well. You can do 2 kegs at once, set them on, and it's the same pressure, the same idea, 10 to 15 psi. Let's set it for a week to 2 weeks, nice cold temperature. You can go online and look at the charts to figure out how much pressure for how much volume you want to have. And it's just that easy. So let's talk a little bit about what happens if you want to do more than 2 kegs. Certainly, you could split these line again and have more T's, but the more breaks you put in the line, the more places you have to worry about gas leaks, and that's always a concern. On this T is actually a little bit larger than my gas line, so I have a T to a reducer, and so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 breaks in the line just to get to 2 T's. So any one of those is an opportunity for a little bit of gas leakage, so sometimes that isn't the best option. So if you're going to go to more than 2 kegs, this is the down and dirty easy way to do it. You want to go to a CO2 manifold, which I just happen to have right here. So this is a 4-way gas manifold, okay? And this manifold's really great. This one actually has 4 shutoff valves. The other thing that you want to look for in a manifold, that inside here, there are check valves. So if for some reason you hook one of these up to a gas post, or if you get a bunch of foam in a keg for some reason, it happens, you can get some beer back up into your gas line. And so the check valves in here prevent liquid. It'll come all the way up the gas line to the valve, but it won't go past the valve and chase its way back to the regulator. So it'll protect your regulator. So you want to have a check valve in your manifolds. So they sell manifolds like this that are 3, 4, 6, 8, depending on how many kegs you want to do at once. You'll notice on this one, though, this is just a gas distribution manifold. So again, if I'm going to set 12 psi as my carbonation pressure, all the kegs are going to carbonate to that level of pressure, that level of CO2 volumes in the kegs. They do sell regulators where each one of these stems has its own mini regulator. So you could set your main regulators to say 40 or 50 psi, and then you can have all your other regulators at different, you could have a 10, you could have a 15, you could have a 18, depending on the style of beer that you're trying to carbonate for carbonation. You can have different regulators on each one of the manifolds. So this is the easiest way. I've used this for years. This has some interesting screw points on it where I can hang it inside the kegerator. I used to use a standing fridge, put some screws on the wall, and I could mount this right on the inside. The nice thing about this too is to help with isolating gas leaks. If you're not hooking up two kegs to say position 3 and 4, you can turn these off, which again, any breaks in the line of your tubing, it helps you minimize potential gas leaks. So this just gives you a little more control over gas leaks. So let's talk a little bit about, what if you have multiple kegs? Let's just talk about 2 kegs. It's likely if you have 2 kegs, you carbonate them, great. You're drinking one, you probably drink one faster than the other one. What happens then if you've got a carbonated keg on position 1, and now you're coming in with a brand new beer on position 2, which is flat? So you would just simply take your tea or off your manifold, hook your gas up to it again. In theory, you will lose a little bit of carbonation from keg 1 as this whole system tries to equilibrate to the amount of PSI available. Realistically, it's minimal. It's probably just more of a theoretical loss, because if you're applying, say, 12 PSI to the whole system, it shouldn't decarbonate while the other one is trying to carbonate. But I have noticed sometimes when I do that, that as I'm waiting for keg number 2 to carbonate, I seem to be losing something on keg 1 a little bit. So again, that's where this comes in handy. So if you do come in with a new keg, you can turn off keg 1 just to isolate it. And you can draw a few pints off of that, even though you're not giving it pressure. There's usually enough back pressure to give you a couple pints. But then before I'm done drinking for a session, you would just open up keg 1, let it re-equilibrate to the 12 PSI you're applying and turn it off, while keg number 2 just stays under pressure until it's fully carbonated. Then once the whole system's under balance again, that they're both fully carbonated to what 12 PSI at your 35 degrees fridge gets you for volumes of CO2, then you can have them both open again. It's, again, like I said, it's nice to have the shutoffs when you're not actively pouring beer, just to help minimize the number of places where you could have gas leaks in all this tubing setup. That's one of the downsides versus bottling of having kegging. People think certainly cleaning a keg instead of 48 bottles is easier. There's no doubt about it. But there's a lot more maintenance that goes into all these pieces than just washing bottles. So it's almost a net loss in terms of experience. So we've talked about carbonating multiple beers. We talked about kegging. What happens if you've got 2 beers of different pressure. And we talked about what happens if you want to have different levels of CO2 in each keg. The only challenge with different levels of CO2 in each keg comes on the serving side. Remember, you're going to have to probably lengthen your beer lines if you want to have a Belgian double at, say, 15 to 18 PSI. Let me take a sip of this. Versus having a British mild in position 1 at, say, 8 PSI. You're going to have to probably lengthen that tubing so it doesn't foam like crazy. You need to add more restriction to the lines. We've done videos on that called Balancing Your Kegging System. You can check that out. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description. But that should hopefully answer your questions on how do you go from carbonating 1 keg versus 2 kegs, or having a big system with multiple kegs and using something like a manifold. I hope you found that helpful. I hope you enjoy this quick video this week. We do videos like this every single week. If you like this type of stuff and you like our channel, please click subscribe and hit the little bell so you know when you're getting new videos. And as always, I guess I get to say it this time, brew on and cheers.